I'll just say now about two things these are very broad. We'll be more specific in the when we talk, do our fireside chat. I mean, one area, one way in which the world has changed in the last decade, and this was the topic of my book, Autocracy, Inc., is we see the increasing integration of financial integration, kind of administrative integration of many of the world's dictatorships, even when they don't have a common ideology. So we've seen the emergence of a kind of network of dictatorships who are not bound by a single set of ideas, Chinese communism, Russian nationalism, Iranian theocracy, if it makes it through the week. A series of other ideological projects who've discovered that it's very easy now to work with one another. And this is because the basis of their power, even though they, as I say, they have different reasons, there are different arguments about why they're legitimate and why they, different aesthetics and so on, but the basis of their power is the same. These are all states who seek to rule, not using rule of law, but rule by law, meaning the law is what the dictator says it is. These are all states who seek to suppress or control or otherwise manipulate the national political conversation and other conversations. These are all states who seek to control courts. They don't believe in independent courts, and these are all states who don't believe in independent institutions more broadly. All of the institutions that make our country function and that make other democracies function, to function, a democracy needs not only partisan warfare, but it needs some institutions that can last and can exist whoever's in power. Some of the civil service, the courts, the people who measure pollution, the people who negotiate, deals with other countries. You need those kinds of people. You need expertise, no matter who's in power. And dictatorships understood that in order to maintain their power, one of the things they need to do is capture that civil service, capture those permanent institutions, politicize them, and keep them in control. These are all states who dislike any kind of independence, any independence of thought, any independence of action, and they prefer everything to be, actually to use Mussolini's description of what the word he invented in his Italy, totalitarianism, everything within the state, everything of the state, within the state, nothing outside of the state. And towards that end, these are all countries who have understood that to stay in power, they need to push back against the very powerful ideas that historically came from our part of the world. So the idea of legitimacy, of self-determination, of transparency, of accountability, of rule of law. All of those ideas, which are radical and inspiring to many people, even people who live in dictatorships, maybe especially people who live in dictatorships, they've understood they need to push back against those ideas, both inside their own countries and around the world. And they began in recent decades, working together to protect one another and to make sure that their states were not affected by as I said, the language of liberal democracy. At the same time, we see in the democratic world, we see it's partly the impact of autocracy, partly it's the impact of behaviors created in the autocratic world. We see more and more of them coming into our world as well. When people first spoke about globalization 20 or 30 years ago, it was very idealistic and marvelous. And one of the core beliefs of the people who reconstructed Europe and the transatlantic world, especially after the fall of communism in 1990, one of their beliefs was that democracy would somehow spread it used to say from west to east. I mean, not that these mean anything anymore. What's become clear instead is that actually the practices of the autocratic world have spread, metaphorically speaking, from east to west. And the understanding of how to control conversations, the use of corruption as a political tool, the politicization of civil servants, of judges, all those things that we've seen in the autocratic world. You see democratically elected leaders who have legitimate right to rule, who have, were elected by the public, starting in Hungary and Turkey, elsewhere, India even. You see them importing the practices of the autocratic world in order to stay in power. And this is it's almost as if the taboo against doing those things fell. And people in the democratic world were watching what they perceived as the success of autocratic leaders who were able to stay in power indefinitely. And they began to ask, or some of them did, how can we do that too? And so you have these very big shifts inside the democratic world and inside the autocratic world. And the echo of those shifts is what we see around us every day.